Hello friend, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, please share, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you for doing so. Now let's get into the story. The first time Alyssa saw Marcus at the old roadside bookstand in Glenwick's Town Square, it wasn't love at first sight, it was curiosity dressed as coincidence. He stood by the corner rack, flipping through a dusty sports magazine like a man searching for something he had no name for. She had come to buy a notebook and left instead with a memory that wouldn't shake loose. He had the kind of face that made you feel like you'd met him before, like a forgotten page in a book you once loved. They spoke briefly, his voice smooth like melted chocolate, hers unsure but intrigued. He made a joke about the vendor's old radio, and she laughed. From that laughter bloomed a conversation, and from that conversation grew a story that neither of them was wise enough to slow. By the second week they had exchanged numbers. By the second month she was falling harder than a fruit in stormy wind. She worked at the city council, quiet and methodical, with hands trained to sort papers and a heart that hadn't yet learned to sort through people. Marcus, on the other hand, was all charm and chances, the kind of man who knew how to paint his flaws with humor. He never stayed at a job long, said he was still figuring out where the road was taking him. Alyssa, who grew up with lists and timetables, had never met someone who rode life like a bicycle without brakes. It wasn't that she didn't see the signs. It was that she believed she could be the signpost that redirected him. In the early months of their marriage, things felt light as air. Marcus would come home with small surprises, jars of roasted peanuts from the market, cheap perfume he claimed smelled like Paris. Alyssa would laugh and pretend not to notice that their electricity bill lay unpaid on the kitchen counter. On nights when the power went out, they would sit by candlelight, eating bread and sipping malt, and he'd tell her stories of how he once beat the odds at a card table in Woos. She didn't like those stories, but she liked his voice, so she let them in like unwelcome guests who somehow grew familiar. Sometimes, after those tales, she would warn him gently. Gambling is a hole that eats everything, she would say. Even love. He'd wave her off with a crooked smile, kiss her forehead and whisper, "I'm not that man anymore." But even a dried riverbed remembers the taste of water, and soon Marcus began disappearing for hours, returning with eyes that darted and pockets that jingled with regret. Alyssa started noticing gaps, coins missing from her purse, excuses that didn't add up. But love, when drenched in hope, can be blind enough to lead you into the dark holding a candle that's already out. She kept believing. She kept praying. She kept defending him to people who saw clearer than she did. She told herself that he just needed one good break, one stroke of luck, and he'd turn his life around. Then came the appointment at work that shifted the tide. Alyssa was chosen by her workers' cooperative to hold the monthly contributions before deposit, nearly 2 million naira in cash. It was a responsibility given only to those deemed most trustworthy, and it settled on her shoulders like both a crown and a cross. When she brought the envelope home, she locked it inside her office drawer and informed Marcus casually, more out of habit than necessity. He laughed and joked, "If I had that money, I'd flip it into 10 million by next week." She smiled tightly, not finding the humor. She made sure to remind him that it wasn't theirs, that it belonged to families who trusted her. He waved her off again, said he knew better. That night, he brought her dinner, noodles and eggs, and they watched a series on her cracked tablet while the fan blew warm air across the room. The power blinked off 3 times, but they laughed through it. In the quiet of that evening, Alyssa allowed herself to believe that things could still find their rhythm. She kissed him good night, unaware that the man beside her was the storm that would soon unravel her sky. When morning came, she yawned, stretched, and walked to her drawer. It was ajar. Her fingers trembled as she opened it fully. The envelope was gone. A cold stillness filled the house, the kind that makes your skin remember every wrong decision it ever made. She searched the kitchen, the living room, under the bed, even inside the flour tin in the pantry, her breath shallow and heavy like a woman running from a nightmare that refused to end. Marcus's phone was off. His sneakers were gone. His brown duffel bag, the one he used when he was up to something, had vanished too. Alyssa collapsed onto the rug in the sitting room, her hand clutching her chest as if she could hold her heart together by force. The sound of her sobs didn't echo. It sank into the silence like stones in deep water. That evening, she sat on the tiled floor until the shadows melted into darkness, and still Marcus did not return. Her phone rang repeatedly, members from the cooperative asking about the deposit. She muttered excuses, her voice dry, each word tasting like betrayal. By midnight, when the door creaked open and Marcus stepped in, smelling of cigarettes and sweat, his eyes sunken like a man who had walked through fire and come out ash, she already knew. "I thought I could win it back," he said, voice barely a whisper. "I just wanted to fix things." Alyssa looked at him, truly looked, and saw not the man she had loved, but the stranger she had been making excuses for. A thief in a lover's skin. She stood up, walked past him into their bedroom, and shut the door with the weight of everything she had ignored. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. The silence said it all. And as she packed a small overnight bag, her hand steady as steel, Alyssa knew this time the damage was not a crack, it was a shattering. The night that Marcus returned home, Alyssa didn't scream, didn't throw anything, didn't collapse into the wailing that tragedies often call for. She just stood by the bedroom window, her figure half lit by the street lamp's orange glow, and watched as the quiet crumbled between them. Marcus sat at the edge of their sofa, slouched like a man who had gambled away not just money but dignity. His hands trembled, not from fear, not from remorse, but from the long hours of adrenaline that gambling brewed like poison in his blood. Alyssa knew that silence wasn't always peace. It was often the loudest grief wearing soft shoes. Her mouth didn't open, but her mind screamed. That envelope had not just carried money. It carried the weight of her name, her honor, the trust her colleagues had stacked carefully upon her back like books on a fragile shelf. Now it had all been reduced to ash in Marcus's blind hope. He whispered a half-hearted apology, followed by phrases like, "I'll get it back," and "just give me a few days." But Alyssa had heard such tunes before. This time her heart was too bruised to dance. She turned away from the window and reached for her duffel. Without a word, she packed 2 dresses, a headscarf, her toothbrush, and the bank receipt that had now become useless. No makeup, no keepsakes, just necessities and wounds. When Marcus rose to stop her, she simply lifted her hand like a traffic officer commanding silence. "If I stay," she said, "I'll break. And if I break, no one will fix me." Then she left, not slamming the door, but closing it the way one ends a chapter, with quiet finality. Alyssa didn't walk out into a world filled with arms ready to catch her. She stepped into the cold of Glenwick's early morning, with her breath fogging the air like unshed pain. Taxis were few, the roads still moist with dew, and the air clung to her skin as if begging her to turn back. But pride had packed her bag, and resolve drove her forward. She found herself at the gate of her cousin Lydia's apartment complex, a faded building with a drooping mango tree and a cranky landlord who was known to grumble about everything from water pressure to the way people breathed. Lydia opened the door in a headscarf and morning wrapper, confusion and concern duking it out across her face. Alyssa collapsed on the chair and told her everything, down to the last naira, the trembling drawer handle, the sleepless night. Lydia listened with clenched fists and eyes full of fire. "He stole from you," she said flatly. "Let's not call it anything sweet. That man is your husband, yes, but this was theft. Full stop." The words struck Alyssa like thunder across a dry roof. She hadn't let her mind call it that, hadn't wanted to. But truth, once named, grows claws. They sat in silence for a while, sipping hot water as if it could cure the kind of ache that lived deeper than bones. Alyssa knew the Workers' Association wouldn't care about her heartbreak. They would care only about the missing funds. She had been the treasurer. Her signature was on the collection sheet. Her hand had taken the money home. What her husband had done, she now had to undo alone. The following Monday, Alyssa returned to her office, shoulders square but spirit weathered. Her supervisor, Mrs. Anoma, called her in the moment she walked through the gate. Alyssa didn't wait to be asked. She explained. Every word cost her a piece of dignity. She said the money had been stolen. She said she was doing everything she could to recover it. She didn't mention Marcus's name. Let the shame be hers alone. Mrs. Anome stared at her for a long time, then nodded, and handed her a letter suspending her from the cooperative committee until the issue was resolved. It stung, but it wasn't unexpected. By noon, the story had spread like wildfire. Co-workers looked at her with tilted heads, some sympathetic, some curious, others with the smug silence of people who enjoy a scandal, so long as it isn't theirs. Alyssa avoided the lunchroom. She spent her break seated in a stairwell, chewing slowly through a bread roll that tasted like cardboard and regret. That evening, she visited 3 friends and called 2 uncles. Some offered small help. Others had nothing but prayers. She sold her blender, her second phone, and her mother's old sewing machine. Every item she parted with felt like peeling skin. But when life robs you in the daylight, you claw back whatever scraps you can under the moon. Her savings weren't enough, but she scraped. She begged. She borrowed. Marcus didn't call, didn't check in. As if once she stepped out that door, the weight he dropped into her life was no longer his problem. And that silence echoed louder than all his previous sins combined. One particularly rough Thursday, Alyssa took a Danfo to the nearby town of Hillsworth to see an old friend who owed her a favor. The woman had since moved away, but the journey wasn't wasted. Sitting at a roadside suya stand waiting for the next bus, Alyssa struck up a conversation with a middle-aged woman who ran a bakery down the road. She had eyes like evening rain, calm but heavy, and wore flour-stained clothes with no apology. Her name was Denise. They got talking about Glenwick, and Alyssa mentioned Marcus without realizing the connection. Denise froze. "You were married to Marcus?" she asked quietly. "Marcus Bello?" Alyssa blinked. "Yes. Do you know him?" Denise gave a tired laugh. "Know him? I nearly married him, until I saw through the charm." A strange silence settled. 2 women tethered by a man they both now viewed as a shadow. Denise didn't ask further questions. She just stood and said, "Come by tomorrow. I could use some help at the bakery." It wasn't pity in her voice. It was something warmer, quieter. That night, Alyssa returned to Glenwick with a suya wrap in hand, a bakery address in her bag, and, for the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope blinking like a distant light at the end of a very crooked tunnel. The bakery on Cider Lane was nothing like the polished cafes in Glenwick's commercial district. It was a modest 1-story building with peeling cream paint, a wooden sign that hung crookedly from rusty nails, and a bell that jingled like an old tambourine every time someone pushed open the glass door. But to Alyssa, it felt like a threshold into something unnamed but new. Denise met her at the back entrance early that Saturday morning, already dressed in her apron, hair wrapped in a faded blue scarf, and flour clinging to her wrists like a second skin. She said little, only handed Alyssa an apron and a pair of gloves, and then nodded toward the mixing table. They began in silence, kneading dough as the scent of cinnamon and yeast filled the air like soft jazz. The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was seasoned, like 2 women who understood that sometimes the best comfort wasn't words, but shared labor. As the hours slipped by, Alyssa noticed things. The way Denise moved with grace, despite a slight limp in her left leg, how she hummed while piping icing, how she never rushed anything, not even sorrow. When noon came, Denise placed 2 meat pies and 2 bottles of malt on the counter, and they sat on stools, eating side by side. "He broke me too," Denise said softly, not naming Marcus again. "But I learned that heartbreak doesn't end you. It simply reveals what you've been ignoring." Alyssa nodded, her fingers tightening around the bottle, the words wrapping around her like a blanket stitched from truth. She hadn't realized how hungry she was, not just for food, but for understanding, for stillness, for a new rhythm that didn't revolve around betrayal. That evening, Alyssa helped mop the floor, and as she wrung out the cloth with both hands, Denise asked, "Ever thought about baking full-time?" The question floated in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Alyssa smiled weakly. "I used to bake when I was younger. My mother taught me banana bread and puff-puff. But I forgot that part of me." Denise raised a brow, tossed her a spare notepad, and said, "Time to remember." Over the next several weeks, Alyssa became a fixture at the bakery, arriving before sunrise, leaving after sunset, flour often streaked across her cheek like war paint. She learned the names of regulars: Miss Portia, who only ordered raisin rolls; Mr. Ao, who always complained but never missed a day; and Chica, the hairdresser down the road, who called everyone darling. In those small routines, Alyssa began to stitch herself back together. She was no longer the woman whose husband had gambled away her future. She was becoming the woman who could craft sweetness from ruin. With every pie she folded, every tray she loaded, she chipped away at the shame that had lodged itself like a bone in her throat. Denise paid her weekly, not much, but enough to cover transport and save a little. More importantly, she gave Alyssa a seat at the decision table. "You have ideas," she said one day. "Stop hiding them." So Alyssa designed a small flyer, titled it The Whist Corner, and suggested they offer Sunday deliveries to Glenwick. Denise didn't blink, just nodded and told her to go print 20 copies. That weekend, they sold out. Despite the flickers of newness, Alyssa's nights were not always restful. Some dreams still brought Marcus's face into the room, smiling, smooth-tongued, holding a deck of cards and whispering, "One last chance." On some days, she wondered if he was alive or if he disappeared into the gutters of some gambling den never to return. But she didn't chase those thoughts far. Pain has a way of planting seeds, and she had learned that not all of them deserved to grow. One humid afternoon, as she wiped down the bakery windows, a woman in a wine-colored blazer walked in briskly. She looked around, then locked eyes with Alyssa. "Are you Mrs. Alyssa Bello?" Alyssa straightened slowly, unsure. "Yes." The woman introduced herself as an officer from the cooperative back in Glenwick. Her tone was clipped, but not cruel. "We've reviewed your payment plan. I understand you've made deposits every week for 2 months. You're still behind, but the effort has been noted." Alyssa felt her shoulders loosen slightly. The woman placed a new contract on the counter, an adjusted repayment plan. "Keep this up, and you'll clear it within 6 months. But miss one, and we'll have to escalate legally." With a nod, she left. Denise said nothing until the bell jingled again. Then she turned and said, "She doesn't know you're already clearing more than debt. You're clearing a whole life." Alyssa didn't reply. She just looked at the contract, then at the sunrise buns she had just pulled from the oven, and realized they smelled a lot like hope, warm, slow, and earned. About 4 months later, a surprise came wrapped not in a ribbon, but in a phone call. Denise picked up and passed the phone to Alyssa, whispering, "She says she knows you from school." The voice on the other end was choppy, but unmistakable. Rachel, an old friend from Alyssa's university days. They hadn't spoken in years. Rachel now ran a home-based catering business in Brightmoor and was expanding into desserts. "I saw your delivery flyers at the Glenwick Market," she said. "Didn't know it was you. Your work looks amazing." Alyssa smiled. "Thanks. I'm learning." Rachel offered a partnership, a small slot at her weekend events to showcase baked goods. It was unpaid initially, but came with exposure. Alyssa told Denise, who simply said, "Say yes before life changes its mind." That weekend, Alyssa stood behind a checkered tablecloth at a community center in Brightmoor, offering lemon loaves and velvet cupcakes to strangers with unsure faces. By the end of the event, she had sold out. She returned to Hillsworth with an empty tray, blistered palms, and a chest full of something that felt dangerously close to joy. As Denise locked up that night, she turned to Alyssa and said, "Funny how the man tried to destroy you with a loss, and here you are, multiplying crumbs into loaves." Alyssa laughed, not the brittle laugh of survival, but the belly-deep kind that shakes loose the pain from your ribs. That night, under the single-ceiling fan that hummed like an old lullaby, Alyssa lay in bed and whispered to herself, "I may not be healed yet, but I'm no longer bleeding." Alyssa never imagined that recovery would be such a quiet, relentless thing. It wasn't built in grand moments or fireworks of success. It was stitched together in early mornings that smelled like yeast and resilience, in long evenings counting coins and cracking eggs into steel bowls. Life didn't rush her healing. It handed her small tests, missing bus change, a burnt batch of croissants, a rude customer, and waited to see if she would break. But Alyssa didn't just hold on. She hardened like clay in a kiln. Her hands became quicker, her voice steadier, and the lines on her face softened with a kind of calm that came from earning every bit of her balance back. Each Friday, she walked to Glenwick with a sealed envelope, paid her contribution, and left without a word. People no longer whispered when she entered. Some greeted her. Others pretended not to see her. She stopped trying to read meaning in their glances. The old shame was still somewhere inside her, but it no longer had the key to her voice. On some days, she would catch a glimpse of her reflection in a window and barely recognize herself, not because she looked different, but because she stood taller. Even the bakery had started to feel less like borrowed space and more like hers. Denise treated her like an equal now, consulted her before changing recipes, let her lead on market days, and even gave her a copy of the shop key. Trust, like bread, took time to rise, and though the past still visited in her sleep now and then, Alyssa had learned how to get up, dust off, and keep mixing the next batch. That rainy Tuesday started like any other, with the hiss of boiling water and the scent of cinnamon hanging lazily in the air. Alyssa was busy rolling out pie dough when Denise walked in, carrying 2 crates of eggs and an unreadable expression. "There's someone waiting outside," she said. "Asked for you by name." Alyssa wiped her hands, removed her apron, and stepped out to find a man seated on the bakery bench. He looked older than she remembered, his beard overgrown, shirt buttoned wrongly, and his slippers half drenched by the puddle near his feet. Marcus. Her breath caught, not out of love or longing, but out of something more complicated, like opening a forgotten drawer and finding a letter you thought you'd burned. He looked up slowly, rain trailing the side of his cheek like tears too proud to fall. "I heard you're here," he said quietly. "You've been doing well." Alyssa didn't reply. The silence between them felt like glass. One wrong word, and it would shatter into something sharp. "I didn't come to beg," he added. I thought maybe you'd want to know." He paused. "I lost the house. They auctioned it. Everything's gone." Alyssa blinked, her chest tight but her face calm. "I'm not surprised," she said. "But you're wrong about one thing. You did come to beg." "Maybe not for money, but for something." Marcus looked away, shame thick around him like an ill-fitting coat. "I'm staying in an old warehouse near Glover Street," he murmured. "Doing odd jobs. Sometimes I clean gutters. Sometimes I carry bags at the park." His words hung in the air like a damp shirt with no wind. Alyssa nodded once, turned, and walked back into the bakery without another word. Inside, Denise didn't ask any questions. She simply placed a mug of warm cocoa on the counter and returned to kneading. Alyssa sat quietly, hands wrapped around the cup, her thoughts stirred by memories she no longer feared. For the rest of the day, she worked with a kind of silent fury, her piping line straighter, her dough tighter, as if her body was wringing out all the things her mouth refused to say. That evening, after they closed, Denise placed a wrapped parcel in Alyssa's hands. "Take this to him," she said. "You don't owe him words, but you're not made of stone." Alyssa hesitated, but eventually walked to Glover Street. The warehouse was dimly lit, its iron roof rusted and weeping from the rain. Marcus sat by the entrance, wrapped in a jacket 3 sizes too big. When he saw her, his eyes lit up briefly. She handed him the parcel. "Meat pie. Bread. 1 malt." "That's all," she said. "Don't read meaning into it." Marcus nodded slowly, his fingers shaking as he accepted the food. "I never thought you'd look at me again," he whispered. Alyssa shrugged. "I'm not looking at you. I'm looking at what I survived." She turned and left, her shoes slapping the wet ground, each step a punctuation mark in a sentence she had finally finished writing. Weeks passed, and Marcus didn't return. The bakery grew busier. Orders doubled. One Saturday morning, while Alyssa arranged boxes for delivery, a teenage girl entered shyly and asked for Madame Alyssa. She handed her a note and ran out before Alyssa could ask a question. Inside was a simple message in Marcus's handwriting: "Thank you for the food. I'm leaving Glenwick. I have nothing left to ruin here. I hope you stay whole." Alyssa folded the note, placed it in a flour tin, and went back to her work. That night she and Denise sat outside under a sky peppered with stars, sharing roasted corn and laughing about a customer who once tried to pay in foreign chewing gum. Alyssa looked up at the moon, her heart still, her spirit light. "Funny thing," she said, "I used to pray for Marcus to change. Now I just hope he remembers who he almost became." Denise smiled, her eyes twinkling. "That's the thing about pain. It teaches you not just who people are, but who you never want to be again." Alyssa nodded, the wind catching the edge of her wrapper, lifting it like a banner of survival. And beneath the stars that knew all their secrets, they sat like women who had danced with storms and lived to tell the tale without bitterness on their tongues. When Alyssa opened the bakery one windy morning, she hadn't expected the past to walk in wearing a pressed blouse and carrying a worn-out handbag. The woman who stood before her had familiar eyes, soft with memory, but sharper now, like someone who had tasted both love and loss and learned to chew carefully. "You don't remember me, do you?" she asked, her voice lilting like an old hymn. Alyssa squinted, her brow furrowing until recognition clicked into place like a key in an old lock. "Vanessa," she whispered. "Marcus's ex. The same woman he used to describe as too gentle to handle life." But standing in front of her now, Vanessa looked anything but fragile. She gave a tired chuckle. "I heard about what happened, what he did. I just couldn't stay quiet anymore." Alyssa didn't know what surprised her more, the visit or the fact that Vanessa's voice held no bitterness, just a steady echo of empathy. "I left him years before you did," she said, accepting the chair Alyssa motioned to. "And I carried guilt for a long time, because I saw what was wrong in him, and I didn't warn the next woman. You." Her confession was bare, like someone peeling off layers of regret with trembling hands. Alyssa poured her a glass of water, unsure of what to say. There were no right words when two women bonded by one man sit across each other in the aftermath, but somehow silence did enough. That afternoon they spoke about everything but Marcus: baking, business, bad weather, broken systems, and by sunset it felt like they had always known each other from another lifetime, where mistakes came with warning signs. Vanessa didn't leave Hillsworth that evening. Instead, she stayed at a lodge across from the chapel and returned the next morning in denim trousers and flat shoes, holding a notebook that had seen better days. "I have a small idea," she said. "I run a thrift business back in Ember Creek. Mostly women. Tailors, hairdressers, cooks. We host weekend pop-ups." "Your pastries could sell out in 10 minutes. Alyssa blinked, cautious but curious. You want to partner? Vanessa shrugged. Not immediately. I want to help. I couldn't help when it mattered back then. Let me do something now. Her offer wasn't dressed in promises. It came raw and quiet, like a hand stretched across an old river. Alyssa, who had learned to read intentions beneath words, saw something sincere. Denise, after hearing the proposal, didn't even blink. Try it, she said. The worst that can happen is you bake too much and eat the leftovers. So they baked through the night. Trays of coconut rolls, banana loaves, chin-chin in resealable bags, and meat pies wrapped in parchment like small gifts. The following Saturday, Alyssa joined Vanessa in Ember Creek, setting up a borrowed table beneath a tree, brushing off dust with her apron, her nerves dancing like oil on a hot pan. At first, people passed by with curious glances, sniffing but not stopping. Then one child tugged her mother toward the table, eyes locked on the iced lemon cake. The woman bought 2 slices. 15 minutes later, the crowd thickened. By noon, there was nothing left but crumbs and breathlessness. Alyssa sat on a borrowed stool, sweat glistening on her neck, laughter bubbling out of her like water after a long drought. She looked at Vanessa, who grinned and said, "Told you." 10 minutes. After Ember Creek, the whispers began to turn into open admiration. More towns reached out, some through Vanessa, others through past customers who shared photos online. Orders doubled, then tripled. A university student from Hillsworth Polytechnic offered to design them a simple logo and flyers in exchange for weekly cupcakes. Alyssa said yes, and within days, the name Whist Corner started appearing on community bulletin boards and WhatsApp status updates like wildfire that didn't need fuel. People wanted her recipes, her story, her goods, but she refused every radio invitation. Let the food speak, she'd say, not the past. Despite the growing fame, Alyssa didn't wear pride like a crown. She remained grounded, still washed the baking pans herself, still walked to the market, still gave leftover pies to the homeless man near the bus stop. Her kindness had not been stolen by hardship. It had only become more intentional. Denise eventually gave her part ownership of the bakery, signing over 45% of the business without flinching. "You earned more than my trust," she said. "You resurrected my dream." One evening, as they closed the shutters together, Alyssa looked at the laminated business license nailed to the wall and felt something deeper than satisfaction. It was vindication without vengeance, healing without clapping back, a life that no longer looked over its shoulder for ghosts. In the soft evening light, her journey looked less like a comeback and more like a becoming. It wasn't until a chance visit to Glenwick nearly a year later that Alyssa saw what had become of Marcus. She had gone to deliver a wedding cake to an event planner who refused to meet anywhere else. As she waited at the taxi park, a commotion broke out at the corner stall. A thin man in torn trousers was being shouted at for stealing pure water. Alyssa looked up, only to freeze. It was him, Marcus. The same man who once wore fitted shirts and shoes too shiny for dusty roads, now barefoot and begging. He didn't see her, or if he did, he didn't recognize her. He stumbled away, shoulders hunched, eyes wild, muttering something to the wind. Alyssa said nothing. She didn't run to him, didn't curse, didn't cry. She simply turned back to her cake box, adjusted the ribbon, and whispered beneath her breath, "I release you." That night, she told Denise and Vanessa what she'd seen. Neither woman cheered. They just sat quietly, sipping Zobo, the room heavy with the kind of sadness that comes from knowing how far someone fell and how easily it could have been you. Vanessa finally spoke. "Some men teach you love. Others teach you survival. Marcus taught us both." Alyssa didn't reply. Her silence was not empty. It was full of peace. And in that silence, something unshakable settled. Not joy at his downfall, but relief that her own hands were clean, her own life restored. Sometimes the best revenge is simply not becoming what broke you. The bakery's bell jingled one warm afternoon, just as the last tray of vanilla bean cupcakes was cooling on the rack. Alyssa stood with a flour-dusted apron and tired eyes that had seen the entire shape of grief and had now memorized the map out of it. A young girl stepped inside, no more than 17, with bright eyes and a notebook clutched against her chest like a shield. She stammered as she greeted, but her enthusiasm poured out like milk in a cup that couldn't hold it. I follow your page. Your work, it's changed the way I think about life, she said, voice quivering with more than just nerves. Alyssa smiled, patient as always. She invited her to sit, and as she prepared a slice of strawberry cake, she listened to the girl talk about her dreams of baking, her father's opposition, her failed jam result, and how she just wanted to do something with her hands that made people happy. Alyssa didn't interrupt, didn't offer grand speeches. Instead, she handed her the cake and said softly, "Start here. Bake joy into every crumb. Let the world taste your heart." It wasn't rehearsed. It was simply the way she had come to see the world, that even broken beginnings can birth something delicious if handled with care. After the girl left, Vanessa, who had overheard part of the conversation, leaned on the counter and smiled. "You're becoming someone's miracle," she said. Without even trying, Alyssa didn't answer. She just looked at the girl's empty plate, the fork still neatly resting across it, and thought about how once upon a time, all she had was fear and flour, and now both had fed more than just herself. Weeks turned into months, and the rhythm of Whist Corner no longer felt like borrowed time. It beat like a second heart. They opened a second stall at Ember Creek Market and began supplying breakfast pastries to a clinic down in Wellingborough. The woman Alyssa had once been, the one who stood trembling in her living room, staring at an empty drawer and an even emptier marriage, was gone, not because she was erased, but because she had been rewritten with gentler ink. Her past had stopped feeling like a shadow and started resembling a garden, full of weeds, yes, but blooming regardless. She didn't talk about Marcus unless someone asked, and even then she didn't curse his name. He broke what he didn't know how to hold, she would say, and I picked up what I could, stitched the rest with purpose. The bakery wall had photos now, customers smiling, children biting into cookies, teenage girls from the baking club she had started every other Saturday. Her story no longer sat in her mouth like a stone. It had become a seed, growing silently in others who needed proof that pain doesn't always end you. Denise often joked, "You turned survival into a brand," and though Alyssa laughed, she knew deep down that it was more than that. It wasn't branding. It was becoming. It was the art of rising quietly until your existence made noise even silence couldn't ignore. There were still hard days, of course, burnt trays, supply delays, moments of exhaustion, but they were raindrops, not floods. One overcast morning, as the Harmattan wind brushed dust along the sidewalks, Alyssa found herself standing in front of the Glenwood Community Hall, holding a cake box wrapped in gold ribbon. It was the 50th wedding anniversary of her former supervisor, Mrs. Anome, who had personally requested that Alyssa cater the desserts. The request had come through a handwritten letter, which felt too sincere to ignore. As she walked through the doors, heads turned not in mockery this time, but in admiration lined with apology. Some old colleagues approached her, palms extended and voices laced with surprise. "We didn't know you had become this big," one of them said. "You always had it in you," another added. Alyssa responded with grace, offering small smiles and warm pastries, never once flexing her growth as revenge. When Mrs. Anome embraced her tightly and whispered, "You taught me what endurance looks like," Alyssa felt a lump rise in her throat, not from pain but from full circle closure. She handed her the cake, 3 layers of fruit and almond sponge, hand-piped roses blooming along its sides like promises kept. As she left the hall hours later, her heart wasn't racing. It was steady, like a song that no longer needed to impress anyone. She realized then that healing isn't loud, it's quiet. It's choosing not to rub salt into old wounds. It's seeing your name on people's lips again and knowing it tastes sweeter now. The evening sky was streaked with purple and burnt orange as Alyssa sat outside the bakery with Denise and Vanessa, their chairs facing the street like women watching the world they no longer feared. A soft jazz tune played on the radio, and in Alyssa's lap sat a sketch of their next project, a training kitchen for teenage girls in the area who had dreams but no direction. "We'll call it second rise," Vanessa suggested, "like dough that proves after being punched." They all laughed, a kind of laugh that healed places untouched by words. A small boy chased a kite across the dusty path, and behind him, a woman waved at the bakery, mouthing, "Thank you." Alyssa looked down at her hands, at the tiny scars from oven burns, the faint flour still under her nails, and thought of all the things those hands had lost and built. "People think the fire breaks you," she said quietly, "but if you're made of the right stuff, it cooks you into something richer." Denise clinked her bottle of malt against hers. Vanessa followed suit. They sat in that moment, not queens, not survivors, not warriors, but simply women who had loved and lost and learned to bake peace into every day. And as the night spread its quiet arms over Hillsworth, Alyssa closed her eyes and whispered, not to anyone in particular, "I am enough. Not despite what happened, but because I didn't let it finish me." Dear listener, if life ever hands you heartbreak packaged as love, don't let it be the end of your story. Sometimes the people who hurt us are the very ones who awaken our strength. Don't rush your healing. Let every step, every tear, and every lesson become bricks for your comeback. You're not broken, you're being rebuilt. Remember, it's not weakness to walk away from what drains you. Sometimes, survival is the most graceful form of strength. May you never be buried where you were only meant to be planted. May your scars remind you not of pain, but of the battles you outlived. May your hands find work that brings you peace, and may your heart never settle where it is not cherished. I pray that every betrayal births a blessing, and every loss rewrites your path toward something greater. May your name rise in rooms where you were once dismissed. May your joy overflow like butter in a hot pan, and may your laughter return louder than your cries. When people remember your name, may it be in honor, not pity. In every dry season, may you never lack water to drink or the will to wait, and may grace wrap around you like warm dough, rising quietly until your life smells like victory. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.